What's one of your favourite Christmas traditions? I love a Christmas cracker. Whether you go cheap or expensive, the reality is that the contents don't last much longer than the dinner. The crown tears, the gift is useless, and the joke usually bombs. But here's the clever thing. The humble Christmas cracker contains the heart of the Christmas story. A king's crown, a gift, and a little message. Christmas is about a king who comes to bring us gifts of hope and peace and love, and a message that the angel says will be good news for everyone. When John opens his gospel, he introduces us to the newborn king as the king of the cosmos. The Message version says, "The Word became flesh and moved into our neighborhood." This king is an unusual king. This king takes on flesh. He becomes one of us. The significance of this is captured in the crown. Usually, kings wear crowns made of gold and precious jewels. The crown that King Charles wore at his coronation is said to be worth £400 million. Jesus, the unusual king, will wear a crown made of thorns that wasn't worth anything, but costs him everything. If you want to know what God is like, look hard at Jesus. The Apostle Paul tells us in Philippians 2:7 that he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. This unusual king is a humble king. Now today we might admire humility, but that wasn't necessarily the case in Jesus' day, which makes this even more unusual. Historians will tell you that in the ancient world, humility was not considered a virtue. What was prized was honor, having your qualities recognized and your name praised. To boast about your achievements was not just culturally acceptable, it was expected in the Greco-Roman world. This is changed with the unusual king who submitted himself to the most humiliating punishment the Romans could create: crucifixion. That included a crown of twisted thorns being placed on his head, with a mocking sign reading, "The King of the Jews." Jesus emptied himself of his divine status and died for the sake of the world that he loved. Could it be that this humble, unusual act of a king is the path to a revolution that the world needs today? To empty ourselves of our self-importance and lay your lives down for the sake of others. And this unusual king moves into our neighborhood. It's hard to imagine a king moving into our neighborhood. When royalty visits a neighborhood to open a new supermarket or a care home, the council will often spend weeks tidying up the streets, landscaping the parks, painting over the graffiti. It has been said that so many places visited by royalty smell of paint. Parents even sometimes use the possibility of a royal visit as a tool to discipline their children. Mum might say, "Imagine if the king or the queen was coming to visit. Would you be happy that they saw your bedroom looking like that?" Usually kings live in palaces. This unusual king was born in a town that had to be defined so as not to be confused with other Bethlehems in the area. He lived most of his life in a builder's house, working in his father's workshop. This unusual king subjected himself to the distresses and disasters of our everyday lives. He chose to live in the same world as us and experience the same daily demands and pressures of life in our village, in our town, or in our city. The one who has lived among the angels now lived among even the ones who didn't recognize or accept him. The word for dwell in the Greek is the word tent. In Jesus, God pitched his tent among us. The Jews had hoped for a king and a huge temple, strong to the elements, invincible to invading powers. But God became human and pitched his tent among them in flesh and poured out his life for the sake of us.
Power is social currency. Those who have this seemingly finite resource are often the last to give it up, resulting in more for them and less for us. This skewed perspective creates a frenzy in which survival of the fittest kicks into gear. And I suppose this would be appropriate if we all had access to the same resources, but we don't. At its core, a thirst for power is fueled by insecurity. Perhaps this is why we struggle to trust our leaders. Could it be that their insatiable thirst for power and their hunger for more is a result of insecurity rearing its head? It is difficult to entrust oneself to leadership these days. In many ways, the true character of a leader is determined by their relationship with power. This narrows the playing field regarding who is and isn't a good leader. To narrow the playing field even further, few leaders have taught to love one's enemies. Even fewer have taught that it is better to give than it is to receive, to repay evil with good, and to serve sacrificially for the common good. As beautiful as these principles are, they serve as mere platitudes if understood simply as moral guidance. However, if understood within the context of who it was who said and did these things, the playing field is narrowed down to one player, one leader. If this leader were a football manager, he wouldn't just simply bark instructions from the touchline. He'd immerse himself into the game, braving the cold of December nights in hostile stadiums, enduring grueling tackles from vengeful opposition, leaving his sweat and tears, but most importantly, his blood on the pitch. This leader isn't a sporting coach. This leader is our King, the King who becomes one of us. This unusual King is Jesus.
This is our unusual King. No crown of jewels, but a crown of thorns. No palace, but a regular neighborhood. A king who leaves his sweat and blood on the pitch. And we're called to live out the life of this king in our neighborhoods, to live among the lonely and the lost, and like Jesus, to be a light of hope to them. Excuse the pun, but this message is crackers. But it's life-changing. A king who becomes one of us and moves into our neighborhoods. Now I could serve a king like that.